this forum. Pinal County Republican Committee thanks you for taking time out this beautiful Saturday morning. I think we're about 6 weeks from Groundhog Day, where he saw his shadow and predicted 6 more weeks, and he was right on. Okay, let's invite our candidates up. Will Carton, will you please take the stage? And let's just get things moving. Justin, come on up. And Michelle, come on up.
Governors, several have become governor, Secretary of State, more than less. The question regarding how do you support, I think a Secretary of State has to support the governor. And I think the time has passed where we have career politicians who go into a Secretary of State looking to become the next governor. We need a Secretary of State that says, I'm going to work, number one, to protect voter integrity, to make sure that the most basic right we have in this republic is to make sure our vote is counted, and that those who are not citizens are not voting, and those that are not eligible to vote should not be voting. At the same time, we have a problem in this state, and you'll hear the three of us agree on this a whole lot, which is the permanently early voter list, where there's a lot of voter fraud that is committed still in this state, where people at one address get multiple ballots and fill them all out, and it's tough to check. The second thing is the Secretary of State needs to streamline government for the next governor. Needs to be sure that business processes are followed. Right now we have filings in the Corporation Commission and at the Secretary of State's office for different types of businesses, for limited partnerships and limited liability corporations. That needs to be streamlined and put together under one office. The third thing that the Secretary of State needs to do that has not happened in the past is have someone who is interested in economic development of this state and will go over mainly to the People's Republic of California next door and will solicit businesses, owners of businesses, to come to this state and can speak to them peer to peer. I'll say, Abraham Lincoln used to say, if a person doesn't care about the credit, there's no limit to what they can do. And that's the type of candidate I would like to be for Secretary of State. Thank you.
My apology for not giving a couple things. We got the timer guy here. You get 2 minutes, is that right?
I gave 2 minutes on that response.
2 minutes on that response. And because we're trying to speed this up, we'll let your closing remarks be kind of why you want to be Secretary of State, okay? So when we get to that point.
I'll help catch us back up right now, because I was going to say thank you all for being here, especially on Saturday morning. Ditto to pretty much everything that was said there, and thank you for coming. Just kidding. I've had this conversation with several of the governor's candidates that I've said to them, I believe that you could really utilize the Secretary of State's office to help advance the state's agenda and what the administration's agenda is. And everyone that I've spoken to has embraced that thought and said, wow, I could actually have somebody as a right-hand man or woman to really help push this thing along. And I think that's something that should be done in this office. I also believe that the Secretary of State's office can be an important part on its own of moving the agenda of the state forward, especially in terms of economic development and attracting businesses and others to Arizona. I want to hit really briefly on the second part of that question, which was, regardless of who the governor is, what if we end up with a Democrat in the office? Does that mean that one of us as the Secretary of State should say, well, I guess we can't work with you anymore? I chair a committee in the Arizona House of Representatives. It's the Public Safety Committee, Public Safety, Military, and Regulatory Affairs. The vast majority of the bills that come through my committee, I get unanimous support on. And even on some of the, I'll say, controversial stuff that we support, conservative principles, I'll get Democrats to support that sometimes because I'll help them understand why it makes sense. So although we definitely need to work and get a Republican governor, even if it's a Democrat, I know how to work with a Democrat and help them see the value in moving conservative principles forward as well.
I think it's already on. There you go.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah.
I believe it's working. It's nice to be with you this morning, thank you very much. You know, Jan Brewer was Secretary of State under a Democrat governor, and there were several things that they worked very well together on. It was, I'm surprised this hasn't happened more, though, going forward, where we see a governor and a Secretary of State working in tandem and working as a team. It's almost like it's two separate administrations, and it's been that way for a while, and that's a shame, because how much more powerful would it be to have those two top offices working together? We have to remember the number one focus of the Secretary of State's office. It has many, many administrative functions, but the biggest one and the most important one is overseeing the state's elections system. And we've heard up here about fraud and about things that are going on out there in the voting and in elections world that shouldn't be happening. I'm the chair of the Elections Committee in the Senate, and we spent the last couple of years looking at those laws and looking at where are we compared to other states, what do we need to fix? We have some gaping holes in our laws. That's the kind of stuff that, in addition to working with the governor on economic development issues, working with the governor on being a cheerleader for our state, believe it or not, that's huge when we talk to other states about why other businesses, why did you choose one state over another? You wouldn't believe how many times the answer isn't education or tax policy. It was because the governor and their lieutenant governor got engaged with them. It's shocking how much that personal touch matters. But elections, we need to focus on how important it is to maintain the integrity of our election system. That's something that my committee has been doing. We can go into that later, some of the bills that are traveling through the system and that we're working on. But there's some real opportunities there to really make sure our system is very sound.
I have two questions here that are similar, and it's what is the opinion of national education, or more commonly known as Common Core standards? And we'll start with Justin.
I'll start with the premise of this, which is constitutional. Imagine that. We'll start with the Constitution, right? There is no constitutional authority for the federal government to be involved in education. And so that's my starting point. I do not believe that the federal government should be mandating standards, and I certainly don't believe that the federal government should be incentivizing standards by holding that carrot out in front of federal funding. There's not much difference in my mind between mandating something and making it really hard for a state to turn away something. So I have a bill in the Arizona legislature right now, 2516. It's over in the Senate. We actually got it through the House. One of the provisions of that bill says that the Arizona Department of Education is prohibited going forward from applying for any federal grants that carry with them strings attached so that the states have to adopt any sort of standards or curriculum in order to receive those funds. And I think that that's an important thing, because I think that it returns the process back where it needs to be, at the local level, where we understand what our children's educational needs are much better than some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C.
I have some real legitimate and genuine concerns with what's being called Common Core, in the sense that it feels like it was something, or it is something, that the federal government is kind of forcing on to the states. And just like cities and towns don't like when the state forces something onto them, this is what the federal government is doing to different states. But I think it's really important to point out the difference between curriculum and standards. I don't necessarily have a problem with standards. National standards are fine if we are allowed to meet or exceed them. Where I'm really concerned with is the curriculum, and making sure that the curriculum is set on local levels, that curriculum isn't something that, as was mentioned, that's coming out of DC or coming out of a state that's not ours. I will tell you, we have several Common Core bills down at the Capitol. I think there's 8 of them just in the Senate alone. And we voted on one just last week. And I voted no on the bill, which, because quite honestly, it was not a good bill. It would have completely blown the system up without putting anything in its place. There are some good bills coming over. I shouldn't say that it's Justin's bill, but it is Justin's bill. And there's several of us in the Senate have said, and we've taken some heat for this, we're not just going to vote yes on something just because it'll feel good at that time if there's a better alternative out there. Just wanted to caution, because I did get asked from some of you about that vote. Keep in mind there's 8 or 9 bills traveling through the system, and not all of them are written as well as others. And so we have an opportunity here to pick the best one and put it in place.
I oppose Concord. I think the decisions are best made at a local level, not at a national level. And I'll go back to Justin's comment about the Constitution. The Constitution delineates what should be done at the federal government level, and nowhere do I see education being a part of that. So I oppose Common Core. It's that simple.
Okay. If you were governor, how would you have handled or responded to 1062? You knew that. Michelle.
We've been asked this almost everywhere we've gone. I voted on 1062. I voted yes. I believe that 1062 was incredibly mischaracterized, is a nice way to put it. There was bad public relations on all sides of this bill. People who supported the bill, I don't think, did a very good job of explaining to folks what it did do and what it didn't do. And then people who were opposing this bill, it was a golden opportunity to really start making a stink about something that, if you've read it, isn't what happened. All of the rancor that came from that bill was, I will say, truly unexpected and unfortunate, and I don't believe that the governor had any other choice but to veto that bill, because it was so completely misunderstood. I would like to think that if one of us up here were, gosh forbid, governor someday, that we would actually work with the legislature in crafting something that worked instead of waiting until the very end to wait for a public reaction to define what the bill was. It's very important going forward that we all work together on this bill, should it be tried again.
I'm a big proponent of religious freedoms. I think that's why this country was set up. I'm also not a proponent, though, of bills in search of a problem. There's the motto of our country, look on your dollar bill. One of our mottos is E pluribus unum. And I see too many things that divide us rather than unite us. We, instead of saying, you know, we're going to try and make you a success in life, and therefore when you come to school, we're going to teach you the language in which this republic and democracy all around the world is based on English. We want you to be a success, and for that reason, that's why we want to teach you English. We have people that divide themselves up into clubs. I'm a African-American club, I'm a Latino club, I'm a Brazilian-American club, I'm a Japanese-American club. I would like to see less of that. I'd like to see American clubs. I think that's what built this country. That's what makes us unique. You know, Ronald Reagan used to say we're only one generation away from losing our freedom. And I see us in a lot of areas being precariously close to being that one generation, which is why I believe people need to be public servants. And they need to be in the way of Thomas Jefferson public servants, which is go out, serve in the public, and then go back home and live under the laws that you created. We have too many people that make a career out of it. And I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think we need more and more business people, more and more people from the real world out serving in public office, and then returning back to that real world, or staying actually a little bit in that real world, so they don't lose touch with what people really struggle with and what people really want, both in our state and in our country.
Thank you. Some of you may know Senator Mike Lee from Utah. He was a United States Supreme Court law clerk for Justice Alito at one point. His father was Rex Lee, was the Solicitor General for the United States. I think he still is the one who's argued more cases before the United States Supreme Court than any other. I was in Washington, D.C. last week at CPAC. He was there speaking as well. And we were back in the green room together shortly after I spoke. And he asked me, he says, so what was the language of that bill? And so I kind of walked it through. I said, well, here's what it said. And he kind of had a puzzled look on his face and said, so why was it portrayed as this? And I said, we're still scratching our heads trying to figure out how that happened because, a year before, actually, the bill from a year before was more broad. The language was probably worse. The new language was seemingly tighter and, it didn't blow up the year before. You actually had 11 law professors send a letter to Governor Brewer that said, hey, look, the bill isn't what it's being portrayed. So, Michelle was right about the fact that once I voted for the bill on Thursday, by Wednesday of the next week when action was required on the bill, the governor really had no choice but to veto that bill because, and I responded to this recently and explained that by Wednesday, I believe that if she'd signed the bill, it would have the opposite effect of what the intent was, which was to protect religious liberty, which I think Will mentioned is critically important to protect religious liberty. But I think there was a backlash coming, and so it was the right thing to do to veto the bill. It was unfortunate that the debate turned the way it did because it really wasn't. Those law professors, by the way, they said it was an egregious misrepresentation of the bill. This, by the way, those 11 law professors from both sides of the aisle, both sides of the issue. So it was unfortunate that it went that way. But we're going to move forward now and be aware that those things can happen and focus on the things that really matter.
Okay, very good. We're back to starting with Will. What is your position on clean election programs, and are you running a clean election or traditional?
I'm running traditional. I'm not running clean elections. I have a tough time with unions who collect dues from people and then don't ask them exactly where they would like to see their money spent, and therefore goes to different causes than what people who give the money have given it for. Clean elections I view as the same way. I think it's a program that should be done away with in our state because you all pay money into clean elections, and then and then candidates come and take it. For instance, in the gubernatorial race, there are several people who are running using clean elections, and I believe it's $700,000. It's almost $800,000. That's the limit, and that's crazy. I go back to free markets. I believe in free markets. There was a question about education and Common Core. We have a great school system in Arizona. You know why? Because we believe in free markets in Arizona. We have charter schools all over the place. And people compete with each other on best ideas. The founders of this country wanted to have 50 states. We weren't a USSR or anything else like that. We are a country that's based on states competing with each other and have best ideas. And unfortunately, we have too many people in the federal government that try and usurp that power. We have people in state government that try and usurp that power. Again, the best decisions are made locally. And so I believe that we should not have the clean election system anymore and let people compete based on what they have to add to the office and using the free market system. Thank you.
Clean election system is not perfect. There's no question about that. Polling shows that most Arizonans support the system to try and keep as much of the large money donors out of it as possible. I won't necessarily express an opinion on it. It's not a perfect system. I agree that there are problems with it. It has gotten better, and I'll tell you that because originally you may remember that there were matching funds, so somebody could come in and it was unlimited. If somebody received a bunch of money from people who supported them, all of a sudden they would get matched. And you remember there used to be the checkbox on your tax forms. So you could actually divert money from the general fund to clean elections, and it went to candidates who you weren't necessarily supporting. I think those were problems that no longer exist in the system. So the only difference I would say with Will, when he points to you, you're only paying for clean elections if you get fined or if you have a civil penalty of some sort, because it's no longer out of the general fund. It's from those sorts of systems. I am running clean. I'm actually glad the question came up because we would certainly enjoy your support for those $5 contributions. They're all over your your chairs or tables and whatnot, you can, at the back of the room at the end, you could drop those off, and your $5 would be very helpful to our campaigns. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I don't like the term clean elections, since I mean, we should really call it what it is, which is the public financing system. Because if you use the word clean elections, and that implies someone like me is running dirty, and I don't run dirty. But I have been in office now 12 years, and all 6 of my campaigns I've run using private dollars and raising money. Raising money is hard. Going out and asking people and saying what you are and what you are about and getting them to buy in with dollars is very hard. I've always been a pretty good fundraiser, but I always like the fact that when I'm out doing my campaign and out spreading my message, the money paying for that is coming from people who believe in me and people who supported me enough to write a check. So I do not run clean, but I do not run the publicly financed system. I never have, and don't intend to start now. But since it was mentioned, I can accept $5 as well. It doesn't go to the public system.
Okay. Justin. You wake up in the morning and you were told you'd become governor. In what way have you prepared yourself for this role?
Thank you. I will tell you that I've had this discussion with my wife, and I had to. I felt it was the only honest thing to do with my wife, because when I went to her and we talked about running for this office, four of the last 8 governors have come from the Secretary of State's office by virtue of appointment. And so I have, in my private sector life, I've been in the private sector for more than a decade. I'm a private practice attorney. I've argued cases up and down the courts. I've counseled with organizations, Fortune 500 companies, mom and pop shops. I understand the needs of the business community and the private sector, and I'm a part of it. I also am in my 2nd term in the Arizona legislature. I know how the Capitol works. I know how to build coalitions. I know how to get legislation, policy passed and handled in a way that is supportive of our conservative principles. I also understand the state budget. I understand where the money goes, how it gets there, and what areas we can look to streamline government. I was one of the prime drafters of one of the governor's 4 cornerstones of reform, making the private sector personnel system what we do in government, and taking those best practices, moving them into government. I understand how to operate and how our state government operates, and I believe that those things prepare me to be able to serve in that capacity, should it be required of me.
I honestly don't think that any one of us could sit here and say exactly how you would feel if you were to wake up one day and suddenly become governor, or know exactly what you would do on that first day. And talking to people that have actually experienced that, who have come from the Secretary of State's office, and went to work one day as Secretary of State, the next day was putting a transition team together for governor, what they relied on and where they drew their strength from was their legislative experience. And their experience were already inside government. When you've spent 12 years walking the halls of the Capitol and working with all different people from all over the state, and you know how the state budget works, as was mentioned, and you know what departments we have and what they do and which ones are really, really important and which ones maybe aren't as needed or as important. Having that foundation, having that base would be incredibly helpful should, gosh forbid, you ever get put into that situation. And just like Monday morning, I couldn't walk into a big company and say, okay, I'm going to be the CEO on day 1. I'm here, I'm CEO, without knowing how many employees does this company have? What do they make? What's their services? What's their budget like? Where does their money? These are things that you learn over time, and you're able to draw on those strengths should they be required. I think it's a very important thing to point out about experience and about knowing how government works, and also places where government is not working.
I'm not running for governor. I think I already proved if I wanted to run for governor, I'd do it. I picked the office I want to run for because I think I can make a difference there. If I woke up that morning, I'd be very sad because the current governor would likely be a friend, hopefully be a friend, and I would be sad to lose someone who's a friend. I think what you need to look for, though, is your Secretary of State, who could potentially is a full spectrum conservative. You need to look for someone who believes the way you believe if they are to become governor. Secretary of State's office is fairly tight on what it does. The governor's office is not. You're running all kinds of different policies. So you need to find someone who's pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun rights. Find someone who's pro-family. Find someone who will fight for you on issues that you expect a governor to fight for. That's what I would hope I would represent, and I think I've proven I represent, as a full spectrum conservative. I'm also an executive. I run a $1 billion company. I've done that for the last 15 years. I understand what an executive has to do. It's different than what a member of the legislative branch has to do. Executives run the business and have to have the buck stop with them on different policies. That's something that, as Michelle just pointed out, you only learn by and through experience. You have three good choices up here. I think we all are in agreement. We like each other, and we all think at the end of the day, I'll answer another question, and I'll preempt one, that if any of us gets elected, the other two will support that person. We think in the Republican Party we have too much divisiveness, and that we need to come together in the end. So maybe I preempted another one. Sorry, Steve.
Okay. What idea do you have to assist counties in voter system management as well as legislation to help to provide online candidate filings?
This is actually something that's near and dear to my heart, so it won't be hot air.
They're all hot air.
I have run a series of election bills over the last, not just couple of years, actually. I've been running bills for the Secretary of State's office and doing their omnibus packages for many years, going back to 2005, I believe. Biggest thing that we have, and I have worked with all 15 county recorders, by the way, and all 15 county election officials, 30 people from around the state, very different views, different parties, obviously different areas. Every county has a little bit of their own unique way that they do their voting. And it's important to point out that the Secretary of State's office oversees the elections, but it's the actual counties that administer the elections. And so it's very, very important to be working with them. We have very large problems with, and I know you have it in your county as well, with lists not being clean, as was mentioned earlier, with the ability for people to literally go door to door and collect people's ballots, show up at your county recorder's office or at an election day polling place with hundreds, if not thousands of ballots. This does really happen. We do have photographs of it. It's not allowed in any state. And that is what I have spent the last 3 years working on, is asking counties and asking your elected officials, what do you need in your county to be able to run your elections more efficiently? What do you need to make sure that your election results are valid and timely? And through that has come this very comprehensive package of legislation that we've been running. But I'd like to point out it started with the counties instead of the state. So it's kind of a nice thing to work on.
I think there are three things. Number one, we need accountability. The second thing, we need better timing. And the third thing we need is transparency. With accountability, we need to understand who the candidates are. We have people that go out and spend dark money and tell you in 30 seconds about a candidate and really tell you half-truths. C.S. Lewis, I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis, and one of the things he said was, half-truths are ever the darkest of lies. And we don't have accountability or transparency in that, and we need to fix that. The second thing is we need to have accountability on ballots. We have our military service. In the last election, 14% of our military who wanted to vote, not who could, who wanted to vote, could not vote, were not allowed to vote in the last election. That's unforgivable. That should never happen. People who are out serving our country and serving to protect our freedoms should be, in some way, anyway, allowed to vote. Timing. We have technology today that did not exist 4, 8, 12 years ago. This should make timing and reporting of elections much, much better. We have our 15 counties, and they all do their elections different ways. But if someone is not getting the election results in an accurate manner, in a timely manner, we need to fix that. That's based on accurate information.
Well, and we've had this discussion before at these forums when you get 3 Republicans who are going to hopefully think a lot alike up here when you're third on the list. There's not a whole lot you can add to some of the things that were said. I will just say that because I want to expound on something Michelle said and ditto to it, because I sit on the Judiciary Committee. I'm the vice chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House, and so some of these election bills last year came through our Judiciary Committee, and I will tell you, there's a big fight out there. Going back to kind of the discussion of other bills that were misrepresented, these bills get misrepresented too. It's kind of a tool of the left, and they don't like the language of the bill. Try and make it something that it's not. Make it a boogeyman, and that's what they've done with these election bills. I'll tell you, there are some common sense things that need to be done that should be done. Michelle pointed out a couple of them, and we heard testimony, which is right, about pictures and people showing up places. I mean, the integrity of the system, there are just a couple of very simple things that could be done. My question is to those who oppose those. For example, bundling of ballots. Why should we not have a concern about groups of people going out and turning in hundreds or even 1,000 ballots from the back of a pickup truck or trunk of a car? I mean, to me, in my life as an attorney, that raises a red flag that there's potential fraud going on there. Seems to me that if you're opposing that you got something to hide. And so I think that there are some very common sense things that we can continue to do to streamline that process.
We'll stay on that theme, I think, here for a second. Let's see. It's been suggested that all elections be all mail ballots, all mail-in ballots. Please discuss the thoughts of eliminating voting at a poll.
I think you ought to allow people to vote still on the day of elections. I think that's how the majority actually still of the ballots come in. There are different ways though. It doesn't have to be just mail. We have smartphones today. We have technology that can be done and better identify people. Again, as I said before, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you shouldn't be voting. And how do you check that? Well, we need voter ID. And having voter ID, using technology, you can get better voter ID than otherwise. That's how I feel about that.
I agree. I don't support an all mail. Actually, it's funny you said mail ballot. I thought, wait a minute, I thought we left that a long time ago. That's right. That's too funny. Mail-in ballots. Frankly, there are a lot of problems with it. I mean, we're not going to back off. I think it's important to make sure we have the access for people who should have the right to vote, and our legal citizens and military will talk about. I mean, that's a travesty to think that a member of the armed services doesn't get a voice. I mean, that to me is an absolute travesty. We have to make sure that doesn't happen. So But with the mail-in system, there are also potential for fraud. And one of those, we talked about the permanent early voting list, where you automatically get that ballot. The problem with a system like that, and I'll say it's got some very good things, but the problem with it is when people move, when people die, you end up with live ballots out there sometimes. So we need to take some measures, common sense measures, again, to just make sure that that list is cleaned up so that when ballots are going out, they're going out at a very high level of consistency to the people that are supposed to be getting them, and not just a live ballot somewhere else. Because I think that is setting the stage for some very significant fraud. And as we continue to let this problem compile year after year, more people who are getting ballots sent out to them to places where they shouldn't be getting sent out, it's compounding. So I believe we need to make some common sense changes there.
Mail-in ballot participation has increased voter turnout in astronomical numbers. But I do not really favor the areas that have gone to all mail ballots. And there are some areas of our state that only do mail-in ballots for elections. I think there will always be a place for polling day. There are some interesting things on the horizon with regards to polling or voting centers. Some of the counties have instituted voting centers where you go in and you type in your address into the machine, and the machine spits out your personalized ballot. You may not realize there's thousands of different versions of the ballot around the state because everyone is uniquely tailored to your neighborhood based on your district and precinct, based on school board and flood control districts and all sorts of stuff. So these voting centers, have the counties that are using it, they really, really seem to like it. And more important, the citizens seem to really like it. It's easy, it's convenient. So I think there will always be a place for, on election day, I mean, it's so American, election day, going to the polls. But keep in mind that mail-in ballots have increased voter turnout astronomically. And the generations behind us up here are less likely to go to the polls than some of us. So a lot of exciting things happening in the election world, especially with technology.
Let's change gears here. I guess this would be an assumption that maybe you will find yourself as governor. How would you address Medicaid expansion, for or against it, and the effect it'll have?
Well, let me start with, and somebody asked me this ahead of time, and I voted no. I was in the House and I voted no on Medicaid expansion. And I spoke pretty passionately against it the night that it all went through. And so I've got a clear record on that. You can look it up and kind of see how I feel about it. My concern is that there is no end game. I understand that we have problems in the way our healthcare system works in this country, in this state, and my feeling is those who supported the Medicaid expansion, I think that for the most part, they weren't trying to hurt the economy. They were trying to help things. They felt that we have a problem, a hidden healthcare tax. We're already providing this care. Look, we're not talking about whether somebody gets care or not. We're providing the care. It's a matter of how it gets paid for. So I understood. That was a difficult issue. I certainly never meant in my comments to disparage anybody who felt that it was something that needed to be done. But I just couldn't ever bring myself in the end to be convinced that there was a way out when we expand, that was the word, when we expand entitlement programs in this country. Tell me how many times we've ever backed off of those. It's not very often. And the reality is we put more money out there, and we invest our taxpayers' money into things that I just don't think is prudent for us to be doing. And so that was the way I came out on that in the end, was that it was not a responsible, long-term prospect to expand Medicaid in Arizona.
I was in a little bit of a unique position in my district because when we were talking about Medicaid expansion at the Capitol, almost every hospital chain or hospital was in favor of it and in favor of expansion, except for two. And those two happen to be Scottsdale Healthcare and Mayo Clinic, both smack dab in the middle of my district and also the largest employers in my district. So voting for expansion was never an option for me, considering that the district I represent. So I was opposed to the expansion. I'm worried that we have now added 300,000+ people to the rolls. I'm worried that the expansion is unsustainable. We're doing the budget this week at the Capitol, and we hope this week we'll get it out. And the numbers are fine for the next couple of years, but then we start running a larger structural deficit in 2017, and a lot of it is directly related to expansion. I would like to just kind of close by saying, I hope I'm wrong, because it's here, and because I hope that when I say I believe it's unsustainable, I hope I'm not right about that, because that is a very, very big problem. There are, before expansion, more people on our state access program, Medicaid, than in K through 12 education, all those students combined. And now we've just added to that. So it's an area that I would like to say I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that we are able to find a way to make it sustainable. And in the last 5 seconds, would like to add that I really hope that this is something that as we move forward through the election, that we stop beating each other up over, because the Democrats are just loving it. I really wish we could all kind of come back together, regardless of how people voted.
I oppose the saddling future generations with our debt today. Again, C.S. Lewis says, when you put first things first, when you put second and third things first, you often lose the first priority. When you put first things first, you often get the second and third thrown in for free. And we seem to be doing that over and over and over again. My son Bo is here. I've been married to my wife for 21 years. We have 5 children. Bo is a twin, although when you see his other twin, which hopefully you'll see, will be down here hopefully a lot, is a lot taller than he is. Bo, do you mind standing up and just telling everybody what's our family motto? I'm sorry to do this to you, Bo. He hasn't done this. He did this in the Senate campaign, but he's never done this. Hasn't done this for 2 years.
Cardinals leave things better than they find them.
I think that's a goal that we all share in the Republican Party, which is we try and leave things better than we find them. And we haven't done so well at that. We've lost trust. Elected officials in our government have lost at least my trust, and I think they've lost a lot of Republicans' trust, because they go back to Washington, D.C., or they go somewhere else and are elected and forget the promises they made and forget the principles by which they were elected and expected to abide by. We need more common sense, conservative people in government who will actually do and are actually willing to do what they say they're going to do, and then return back to the private sector, who aren't looking to make the next step in government, the next step in government, and make a career out of it. That was never the intention of the founding fathers. My grandfather used to say this. He used to say, plant trees, and I know many famous people say this, plant trees the shade of which you will never enjoy. With what we're doing in this state on Medicaid expansion and on many other things, for instance, I'll go back to just clean elections. Just because the fines go to pay for clean elections means we pay higher taxes for the other things the fines were used for before. We need to stop playing those games. And we need to start really living the way you live in your private life, which is spend less money than you earn, period.
Our candidates are really pressed for time today, so I want to do 2 more questions, and then I'm going to let them go into their closing statements. What is your position on public traditional schools converting to charter schools, and what effect will this have on school choice and state budgets?
I had several schools in my district that are public schools say, well, they went out for their overrides or their bonds and they didn't pass, and so they needed some extra money, so it's like they waved a magic wand last year and said, bing, you're now a charter school. And why did they do that? Is because they got more money for that type of school. And I sat there and I thought, well, what if everybody did that? I mean, obviously the formula needs to be fixed if people, we can't have districts doing that. And some districts following the rules and others not. We are fixing that this year by going back and saying that there is a difference between a legitimate charter school and one that is set up to be a charter school within the public school system, and one that starts out as a traditional public school and then says, I'm a charter school now just to get more money. There were schools that did it, they were caught, and we are remedying that situation this year.
It's a complicated question because of exactly what Michelle said, the formulas. What I think you need to do is create an even playing field and then let people compete. That's the role of government, not to pick winners and losers, but to create a level playing field for which people can then go and compete and come up with the best solutions or the best answers. And so if there was legislation or a policy to allow charter schools or public schools to become private that was done under that basis, I think that's a good thing. If it's not done on that basis, it's not a good thing.
I'm going to coin a phrase. I'm going to call it a Chino. Talk about rhinos. It's called charter in name only. You heard it here first. It's an accounting gimmick, is really what it is. Because Michelle's example is exactly right. So they went out under the system that is intended for bonding over it, and the voters said, no, we're not going to give you any more money. And they said, oh, okay, well then we'll change the name of our school. And we're not going to change any of the teachers, the administration, anymore. We're going to create a board now. Instead of having a school district board, those people are going to now become members of our charter board. It didn't change a thing other than the fact that giving them the money that their voters told them we didn't want you to have. So this isn't about, look, I think we need broader discussion about school finance generally and how we finance our schools in the state. The system is absolutely incredibly complicated, and it doesn't need to be that way. There's a bill over in the Senate right now. I think Chester Cranwell has a bill. We'd like to see some of these things come through and facilitate how we fund our schools, because if we fund our schools in a way that just simply makes sense and common sense changes there, we won't need these gimmicks and we won't need to be going out for bond overrides, all of these things that people are kind of gaming the system to do. So I would like to see us put a stop, a moratorium on these changes to the charter schools from the district schools if the intent really solely is just a money grab.
This is another one of these questions where if you find yourself, I think, in the driver's seat. What would you do regarding illegal immigration, and how would you address it?
This is an easy question for me. I go down, during the Senate campaign, I went down to the border many, many, many times. And again, that C.S. Lewis quote about putting first priorities first applies. And it applies in this one in spades. We need to secure our border first. You can't count. You can't solve a problem when you don't know exactly what the problem is or the amount of the problem is. And we don't have people who are standing up and fighting enough for that. I played football up in Northeast Mesa for Jess Parker, winningest coach in Arizona history. He's the guy, he's a football coach who is an old school football coach. We were bad. We didn't get drinks during the middle of summer, 2-a-days. And Jess Parker was more interested in raising men, boys into men, than he was about football, actually. And Jess used to make us memorize, Coach Parker used to make us memorize poems. So I have some poems that are just seared in my head, because if you didn't memorize them correctly, there was a punishment. And one of the poems is, the world is not interested in the storms you've encountered, but did you bring in the ship? And it's time to finally bring in the ship on this one. We talk enough about it. It would be very easily solved. If you put the military on the border, heck, if you put 6 Navy SEALs on the border, you could solve the whole problem. It's a bunch of talk, and it's talk about people, it's talk by people who are unwilling to actually go solve the problem. We need to solve that problem of illegal immigration. We need to be humane about it once it's done here and help families. But that's what we have court systems for. That's why we have all kinds of different tools to use. So if I were governor, I would go to work on that immediately. I would make that a 100-day program, and I'd get the job done.
I'm a native Arizona, 5th generation. Was born in Mesa, but actually grew up in Yuma. And so I grew up in a border community. And in fact, we're talking about it. You know you're a native, or you know you've been here a long time, if you know what a Latmo bag is. So
Legend City.
that's right. So I grew up in Yuma, and I understand the needs of a border community, a border town. I saw a border day in and day out, and the issues associated with it. Guess what? In Yuma, we've pretty well secured that sector. It's somewhere in the 90%, I think now, of illegal crossings are detected. It's possible we can do it. And on the issue, I agree. I mean, to me, once we secure the border, which we can do, and it won't take that long to do, the discussion about what to do on all of the other issues, I believe, becomes easier to have. Americans, Arizonans, do not trust their government to secure the border if other things are included with it. This is the comprehensive plan. And there's a reason for that, because our history tells us that the government didn't do what it was supposed to do the first time around. So why should we believe that it'll do it the second time around? And so I understand why people feel that way, but I do believe that once we take care of the issue and just have it secured, we'll be able to have a rational discussion about now what do we do to fix the other pieces of that. And I believe that if I woke up that day and was the leader of the state, the governor of the state, I believe that I could work very well with our congressional leaders and our Senate leaders, because this is going to require some federal firepower. I mean, literally. I mean, it's going to require federal involvement in the process in order to get it done right. We've tried to do it on a state level before alone, and we simply don't have the funding necessary to do it.
Well, I completely agree that securing the border is the first and foremost number one priority that we have when we're talking about the issue of immigration. The Yuma sector, as was mentioned, is an excellent example. And I actually find it a little discouraging that we have an excellent example in Arizona of the Yuma sector. We know it works, we know it doesn't work. Why aren't we emulating that in areas where we have big problems? When you're down by the border area and there's signs that the federal government has posted, it's telling you as a citizen to be careful because it's not safe in that area and you're in the United States. That's horrific. And I can't even believe it's gone on this long. What's really, really important, and I'd like people to think about as well, is you talking about Governor. The Secretary of State's role is making sure that people are not voting that are here illegally. And that is a very, very, continues to be a pressing problem and an issue and something that all states are looking at, but Arizona specifically. So kind of in tandem, secure the border. But the people that are here, that aren't here legally, we need to make sure that they're not voting in our elections.
Okay, we're going to do closing remarks now. Well, I believe Justin, you started first. You'll have 3 minutes. Tell us why. Here's the sales pitch. Here's why we didn't vote for you. So, timer, you got that? We're on a 3-minute mark. Go. Okay.
Well, wait, time out. You said, you were asking if you were asking.
No, closing remarks.
Okay.
Closing remarks.
But you said, tell us why.
Tell us why we want to vote for you.
Okay. Restart. I'll try and do it even in under 3 minutes. Thank you for being here again. I'm Justin Pierce. I mentioned earlier, I have significant experience in the private sector. I have significant experience in the public sector, working in government, not just as an elected official, by the way. I was elected as a precinct committeeman about 21 years ago. Yes, I was 18. I've been involved at the grassroots level of our party for a very long time, working to help candidates, good conservative candidates, get elected. And I believe that in that period of time, whether it was working for other candidates, causes, pounding the pavement and pounding the doors myself for good causes and people, and in the meantime, raising a family. I have 5 wonderful kids and a wife that I've been married to for 14 years almost. And I think that when you take my life experience, my education. I've got a law degree from Georgetown, one of the top law schools in the nation. I graduated with honors. I've got an accounting degree from Arizona State University, business degree, law. When you put it all together, I think you'll see that the level of qualifications, experience, and education that I have are top-notch. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, I was in Washington, D.C. last week. I was picked by CPAC as one of the top 10 in the country under 40. I just getting squeaked in at 39 for that. And I was chosen to speak on the main stage with, the day, that morning you had Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Cruz, Senator Lee, Senator Toomey, Governor Christie, Governor Jindal. I actually spoke on stage between Governor Christie and Governor Jindal. And I was on that stage for a reason. I can tell you I'm a conservative, but you don't have to take my word for it. I've been recognized as one of the top conservatives in the country and one of the leaders of the future. And so I ask you to take a look at my qualifications, experience, education, background, combine it with those things, the objective evidence that I am who you would want in a leadership role in the state. And I ask you for your support and for your vote. Again, I'm Justin Pierce. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, again, thank you so much for having us here this morning. A little bit about myself as I wrap up. I moved here from the Chicagoland area, and we didn't have Ladmo bags, but we did have Bozo the Clown. A couple of folks here from Chicago know exactly what I'm talking about. Moved here with my family, and we opened up a business in Arizona, the Arizona Dream. Came here, knew very few people, was able to open up a business and be successful in an environment with low regulations and not as many mandates as we had back in Illinois, and certainly not as many taxes. And my family was really able to make something of themselves in Arizona. We grew that sign company to be one of the largest of its kind in the country. We sold it, and during that time I had gotten involved in politics, and I actually came up through the Republican Party. I came up through the ranks of being a young Republican, being a precinct committeeman and a state committee woman, and working on various campaigns and issues. And I was delighted when I found myself at the Capitol, and I'm now going on my 12th year at the Capitol. I served for 8 years in the House, and now I'm going on my 4th year in the Senate. I was fortunate to be able to work on commerce issues as soon as I got there, because that's my passion. Small business, and what it takes to be successful in a small business, and what it's like to be the person who is employing people and dealing with workman's comp and signing the fronts of paychecks and worrying about making payroll. That was, when I first got to the Capitol, there was a very big lack of people who had that understanding. So being a champion for small businesses. And then I go over to the Senate, and I made the chair of the Elections Committee. And although it was very different than the commerce world that I had immersed myself in the House, it was just as important. And so the last several years, as I mentioned, I've been the one carrying the bills and carrying the water for the Secretary of State's office and your county reporters and your election officials, dealing with cleaning up the permanent early voting list, dealing with stopping ballot collections. I was the one that was the target of all of the opposition last year. And that should scare you, that people are afraid that we might take away the ability to turn in thousands of ballots. But that was very scary to me. But there was a large, and still is, a very large opposition movement to that. I'm tackling the issue of dark money. I'm taking it from all different sides when we're talking about dark money. Huge issue and a big thing that we're going to hear more about as the election progresses. And it should also be a very big concern to you. Hillary PAC, largest PAC they think ever created, will be planning on spending money in Arizona. So again, I have the background. I believe I have wonderful experience. And my name is Michelle Reagan.
I'm going to stand up if that's okay. I'm Will Carden, and for those of you who don't know my background, I grew up here. I'm a 5th or 6th generation Arizona, depending on how you count it. Lots of people like to cheat and fudge on that, and I don't know how you determine that. I went to school here in a public school, I then went to Stanford, where I got a degree in public policy and played football for Bill Walsh, the 49ers coach, after he was done with the 49ers. I was the world's greatest bench warmer. And then after that, came back, started an auto finance company, started a small business, had to deal with government regulation, a lot of it. Sold that business, went back to Harvard Business School, was there for a couple of years, and then, despite having a lot of job offers and thinking very seriously about going to Wall Street and those other things, decided I'd come back home. And I've come back home for the last 15 years, been the CEO of our family business. And most of what we do, in fact, I was on this dirt 14 years ago, looking at, there was a guy selling it, and I'll give you the price, it was $2,500 an acre for this whole area. That tells you about the growth rate in Arizona, doesn't it? But that's what I've done for the last 15 years. And we go through and we have to deal with 404 issues on ground and on ground and getting bridges over. You don't realize how hard it is to get some bridges over, just simple washes here. And how the Army Corps of Engineers get to say it's navigable waters of the U.S. It's crazy, the stuff that businesses have to deal with now. Instead of having government be partners with business and making jobs and our economic life better, they choose to impede business. We can't have that anymore. We need to have common sense people in government who now will reform that. Coach Walsh used to always like to talk about Jerry Rice. Jerry's favorite quote was very similar to what Einstein's quote was. Doing the same thing over and over and over is crazy. We've got to stop doing that. I believe at the Secretary of State level, we can have someone that spends, after they take care of all the elections priorities, which should be the #1 priority, and it has a lot of low-hanging fruit that should be taken care of first. After streamlining government for taxes, can then go out and work on economic development. We talked a little bit about the border. Let me give you an idea. There is a port south of us on the whole western seaboard. It's almost impossible to build a port now because ports, environmentalists get involved and say, no, you're not expanding. On the whole eastern seaboard, it's the same thing. We have a natural port down in Mexico that if we as a state would think ahead, like we did with the Central Arizona project, we could build something to where people from Mexico don't want to come up here to work. There are great jobs there,